All right, everyone, welcome back into another NFL DFS video. Going to be getting into the Week 13 lineup builder video here for you, which will be me covering my favorite chord plays, my favorite value plays, my favorite sleepers, some GPP lineups, giving you guys the optimal lineup as well, showing you guys my favorite stacks as well, touching on a couple of fades. Got a lot to get into, so with that, let's go ahead and get into it. So guys, let's go ahead and start off with my favorite core plays, and we're going to start off with quarterback Justin Herbert. So if you guys are someone that watched the core plays video already, you already knew that the biggest struggle that we have on this slate is that Justin Herbert is simply too cheap. And the issue with Justin Herbert is that we don't exactly have to go out of our way to pair him up with Ladd McConkey or, like, let's say Johnston, maybe Will Dissly. We don't really need to go out of our way to target him because, well, let's say Ladd McConkey, he's a little bit priced up. And just given the pricing that we have, there's just other options to go with. Now, one of my favorite stacks is actually going to be Herbert. I'll just show you guys it. Herbert, and then pretty easily going McConkey and then Johnston as well. I know Johnston had those terrible drops, but the big plays were there for him. We have seen him make those big plays in prior games earlier on this season. Decent matchup as well, so I don't hate that. You know, that's a sneaky decent stack there. But for me, starting out at quarterback, still going with Justin Herbert. Then at the running back position, guys, to me, it's still pretty simple as well. Now, the data sees this a little bit differently than what I see it because, well, one, I do really love Chase Brown. He's going to be kind of chalky, though, 27%. I agree with that. He is like the first player I'm going out of my way to roster, just given his pricing. It seems like they just kind of forgot about Chase Brown. Now, the matchup is not the best going against Pittsburgh, but given the fact that they're coming in off of a bye week, I feel like we just got his pricing a little bit cheaper than he really should have been. But again, the matchup is a little bit difficult. I could see a path to where he doesn't like dominate like he has been. But with Zach Moss still out, if you just combine the two players' production, that would really just equal what Chase Brown has been able to do the last 3 weeks with Zach Moss off the field. So I think he's going to be an easy plug and play, especially at that price tag. And so from there, we go ahead and get into the rest of the running back plays. And this has kind of been the issue lately over the past 3 weeks now, including this week, is that we have had a lot of great plays, especially at the running back position. If you end up on the one that doesn't score a touchdown pretty much, if you're doing a main build, it's not going to work out. Okay, so like my player pool the last 2 weeks has been pretty darn phenomenal. Just getting the correct optimal lineup has been a little bit lucky. Let's just put it that way. And so that's going to be the case again this week because look at it, guys. We got Bijan Robinson who's popping up as a great value play. We got Alvin Kamara that's popping up as a great value play. Both gaining some ownership. Kyron Williams is gaining a decent amount of ownership. He's going to be a good value. Breece Hall's in a good spot. I could certainly talk myself into him. Bucky Irvin's getting a decent amount of ownership. But to me, guys, I do think it's simple. I probably do want to be playing Joe Mixon. Now, I do treat is Joe Mixon. To me, Joe Mixon does become a little bit risky because of the pricing, because you could easily go to Nico Collins, who I would argue is a great play as well. They both get a phenomenal matchup going against the Jaguars. So to me, it does somewhat feel like we are trying to get lucky that it is Mixon as the one scoring the touchdowns rather than Nico Collins. Both of those are going to be good spots. Both of those are going to be phenomenal plays, but I do really like the idea of getting to Joe Mixon as well. So with that, guys, let's go ahead and get on into the receivers. And so looking at my favorite receiver core plays, these are the players that are currently projected to score the most points. So we see Puka Nacua is popping up in there, guys. I do feel like Puka Nacua is a great play, someone that we should be going out of our way to target. But we do have Nico Collins popping up in there. We have Cooper Kupp, who could certainly have a good game. And we got A.J. Brown, who I really like in the spot with Devonta Smith off the field as well. And so I really feel like all those plays are going to be great plays. A.J. Brown, if you're not paying up for Joe Mixon, I would suggest playing him. Again, with Devonta Smith, we are going to see that target floor be really high, probably at least 6 targets in this game, and it is a pretty good matchup. Last game against the Raiders, they just didn't need to throw the football. In this matchup against Baltimore, it's expected to be one of the highest scoring games of the year and definitely of the week. And so with that, A.J. Brown should be in line for a lot of production. And obviously, we want to be trying to stack that game. I already mentioned my love for Nico Collins. Again, if you're not playing Joe Mixon, I think we can certainly get to Nico Collins. Nico Collins had himself a pretty massive week last week, getting a touchdown, 9 targets, 5 receptions. That was kind of his first full game back. And so it's not surprising that he had himself a good game. But I do think we want to be starting our builds out with either Puka Nacua or Cooper Kupp. I like Puka Nacua a little bit more just in limited snaps because he got banged up. In that game, he still saw 13 targets, still had 23.7 points, and that was without a touchdown. You could easily get to Cooper Kupp as well, who had 11 targets himself, only 60 yards, but still had 8 receptions. He made up the difference between him and Puka Nacua with a touchdown. So obviously, whichever one is scoring a touchdown, that's going to be really beneficial for us. I will say the Jets coming in off of a bye week is somewhat interesting to me. A lot of people are writing them off, as they should be, right? But at the same time, Aaron Rodgers and Devontae Adams might go a little bit YOLO, and I could see them being good plays. Devontae Adams, has been very solid recently as well. You'd argue he is due for some touchdown upside as well. The touchdowns really haven't been there for him recently, and you would argue he is due for some positive progression there. But to me, guys, where I want to be looking at is starting with Michael Pittman Jr., more of a GPP play, but I do really love the price tag, 5.2 for a receiver number one. He was able to be pretty productive with Josh Downs off the field. Now, the issue that we have is that he's going to be getting Anthony Richardson as his quarterback, whereas if we had Joe Flacco, I think he'd just be a core play for everyone. But we saw him have a good game last week, played a bunch of snaps as he has been, still had 7 targets in that game, 6 receptions, and 96 receiving yards. Now, the issue that we have here is the matchup with New England. Last week promoted a pass-heavy script because they're playing from behind. That might not be the case this week, and so that actually brings up a point that JT, I think, is actually going to be a good running back value play here as well. And then for me, another core play that I will be going on my way to roster is going to be David Moore. Sounds kind of interesting there, but Leggett and Thielen have kind of been second fiddle to David Moore in terms of snaps, and we saw David Moore get 10 targets last week. He looked pretty solid. Now, I do think Adam Thielen, one more week to be healthier, he's probably going to get more snaps in this game, don't get me wrong, but David Moore just at this price tag is a little bit too cheap. Heck, if we only get like 7 points out of him, that's still enough at this price tag. So he's a core play in the sense that I'm going out of my way to roster him. That's how I view core plays, is which players am I going out of my way to roster? And these are the players that I'm looking at. Tight end wise, I don't necessarily have a core play that I'm going out of my way to roster. There's a bunch that I will be trying to play. And so now, guys, we're going to go ahead and get into some of my favorite ownership leverage plays and also some of my players I'm going to be fading. And what I mean by fading is players I'm not going to be on as much of the field, or players that I'm not necessarily going out of my way to roster, but maybe still comfortable rostering. I do want to call it, typically speaking, guys, the quarterbacks are going to be the plays that always rank out really best ownership leverage-wise. And Justin Herbert is going to be that quarterback that is ranking out the best ownership leverage-wise. So even though he's going to be one of the highest projected owned quarterbacks on the slate, he still is going to be someone that we should be going out of our way to roster. And so looking at guys, I do think it's worth calling out that really no one is coming in like over-owned. We are seeing David Moore potentially, but again, it makes sense just given the likelihood for him to be able to have a good week a good day. But I want to call it like Kyron Williams as a potential fade, and actually Drake London. Okay, and stick with me here. And so the reason why I'm struggling to get to those two is because I feel like I could talk myself into other better options at the same price tag. Now, Kyron Williams is a little bit touchdown dependent. Now, he does get an okay matchup, I would say, going against the Saints. But you look at the last couple of games, like Philly, that game was a little bit of a shootout. They were playing from behind. They didn't really get that much production in the receiving game. That's a worry. Against New England, a team that they should have, just really beat by a lot, and we should have saw Kyron Williams have a really good game. That did not occur. And so we look at something like Kyron Williams. Why would we get on Kyron Williams when we could almost talk ourselves into like someone like Jonathan Taylor, who is somewhat of the same play? I know with Anthony Richardson there, that doesn't help Jonathan Taylor, but at the same time, GPP-wise, he is someone that holds just as much, if not more, upside. And given the fact that Indy is going to be without Josh Downs, given the fact that this should be more of a run-heavy script type of game, I could see Jonathan Taylor just going out and have a massive game. But at the same time, why would we play those two when we can just play someone like Aaron Jones, who gets a very, very good matchup going against Arizona, where the volume has been there for him, and he is getting involved in the passing game as well. To me, I would much rather get to a cheaper Aaron Jones than a somewhat chalkier Kyron Williams. I think that's a good pivot. And for what it's worth, I would rather get to Bucky Irving more so than I would Kyron Williams at that price tag. For what it's worth, I would also probably rather get to Brian Robinson Jr., even though he's been banged up. Just need to be more healthy in this week, but that's more of a GPP option. And then getting into Drake London as well, to me, it's just more of a pricing type thing. Like last week against Denver, that was a difficult matchup, don't get me wrong. 7 targets in that game, still salvaged a decent day, 9.1 fantasy points. But he does get a matchup here against the Chargers, who are a pretty good defense still. No, they haven't been as good lately, but still tougher opponents, and that's still true here in this game. Tough opponent for the Chargers defense, but Drake London to me at that price tag is a little bit concerning. Like I would argue I'd rather get to Mike Evans there. That being said, you could just go down to someone like Ladd McConkey, who I do think is a little bit too priced up, but at the same time, if you are playing Justin Herbert, he does make sense as a play that you could get to. Calvin Ridley has been someone that's been going off, and sure, Washington's defense has been better recently, but the air yards have been pretty good for the Tennessee Titans lately. And Calvin Ridley getting 6, 6, 9, 8, just a healthy target share. I would argue he's just as solid of a play. Michael Pittman Jr. is a play that I like. I already mentioned that, but at that price tag, I would rather get to Michael Pittman Jr. And so for me, I have found reasons to not play Drake London at that price tag rather than I have found reasons to play him. Now, both him and Kyren Williams are plays where you shrug your shoulders if you're closing out your build and you just are wanting to play a more chalky option. I'm kind of okay with that. At the same time, I think there's better, I shouldn't say better, but just as good, cheaper options that are going to be less owned that I would rather get to as it sits right now. So guys, I want to go ahead and get into my favorite GPP plays, and let's start with probably the ugliest one, but you guys are going to get what I'm trying to get at. It's going to be Gus Edwards. Let's just say, let's paint the scenario here with J.K. Dobbins out. Gus Edwards is going to be the RB1 there. Now, he has not looked good. He really has never looked good in his career, but he is a bulldozer. He is a guy that can short yardage touchdowns. Apologies there. Let's just paint the picture. Quentin Johnston gets a DPI in the end zone. Gus Edwards punches in a touchdown. Boom. 6 points right there. At 4.3, could easily give us like 12 fantasy points and really potentially be in the GPP winning lineup if he gives us, let's say, 40 rush yards and maybe 2 touchdowns. Maybe we get 2 lucky short touchdowns. That could easily happen. Like, that's not too crazy. J.K. Dobbins has been somewhat of a touchdown machine. Could see that happen. It's the same thing that happened for him in Baltimore as well for Gus Edwards. So I don't hate that as a GPP play, especially at 4.3, especially if you're trying to find a value running back play and maybe you're just trying to punt the position. I could see doing that there. That I already mentioned, but I do think Aaron Jones is going to be a solid GPP play, 6.5. And so if we look at Aaron Jones, it's not like he's going to be too low owned or anything like that, or too high owned. I would say he's properly owned at 10%. But again, you look at some of the other running backs that are getting higher ownership than him, I think he makes for a solid GPP play. I think there's a path where he could really go off. I already mentioned Jonathan Taylor, I think is a solid GPP play as well in terms of something that can break the slate at low ownership. And then last, I'm going to put this player in together with kind of 2 tiers, if you will, under the value tier, but also still under the GPP tier. And that's just more or less if you're trying to punt at tight end as well, you're trying to really just get up to studs. I could see playing Tommy Tremble with Sanders out, who's the rookie tight end for the Carolina Panthers. We're going to see Tommy Tremble get a ton of snaps. And he also gets a pretty good matchup here going against the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. This has been a matchup that we've really been wanting to target. This is a spot where I have actually gotten to him a decent amount because the lineup path has made sense for me to get to him, because I did like the studs that I was getting to and I didn't want to change my build. So I'm like, all right, what's the cheapest tight end play that I can get to? Tommy Tremble. We're going to get a lot of snaps. We should get a decent floor of, let's say, 3 fantasy points, which might not be a lot, but at 2.8, I would certainly take that. And given the fact that he gets a good matchup, I'm kind of willing to take that risk here. Then I already mentioned one of the other values that I'm going to get to. That's going to be David Moore. I do like the price thing out of him. Again, good matchup. 2 Carolina Panthers players that we can get to almost at the minimum price. To me, that's pretty intriguing. And so David Moore, going to be a high target share, going to get around 70% of the snaps, or he should. Don't want to say that's definitive with the Panthers, but that's what we're expecting. So I do like him. Another player that's cheap, a cheap receiver that's going to get a lot of snaps, is Keyshawn Boutte, who has been getting a lot of snaps lately. A lot of people were thinking it might be Jalen Polk. Jalen Polk just hasn't looked the part. Keyshawn Boutte is not great, but he has been getting a decent amount of snaps, and the targets have been there for him. His worst game was in their last game against Miami, 4 targets. Other than that, he's been pretty darn solid. 7, 8, 4, 7. Like, we'll take that at that price tag if we're trying to punt. For what it's worth, I wouldn't be surprised to see Kendrick Bourne as well get a little bit more work in this game as well. 5 targets, 6 targets. So he has been getting targeted more. If he gets more snaps, let's say he goes up from the 50 or so % of the snaps that he has been getting to, let's say, even 75. Maybe if we get 80 or something like that, he could easily break the slate. And this is a good matchup for opposing receivers as well. This is probably the spot where we want to be targeting. So one of those 2 I do think could have a good game. At the same time, maybe it's still just Hunter Henry or Demario Douglas having a good game. All right, guys, so I'm going to get into the next portion of this video, which is going to be showing you guys my favorite cash build. Then I'll be showing you guys what the 9-5 lineup builder is telling us is going to be the optimal lineup. And then I'll be showing you guys kind of what your exposure would be looking at in terms of having 150 lineups. If you guys are really doing the lineup builder and applying what I was talking about during this video into a lineup builder as well. Before we get into that, guys, make sure to hit a thumbs up and subscribe to the channel if you guys haven't done that before. And so as it sits right now, guys, this is what I am looking at for my cash build. And again, if you guys don't like this, that's perfectly fine. Do want to call it that this is what I'm looking at right now. This could change by the time lineup block comes around, and it probably will. I'm still finagling around a little bit. I don't know if I exactly want to get to Pittman and David Moore in the same lineup as well as Tommy Tremble. At that point, if I'm playing Moore and Tremble, why not just get to Bryce Young and hope for a good game against Tampa Bay? That's something I don't exactly like. And I don't really love right now Justin Herbert's solo stack as well. But I haven't been able to get away from Herbert, and I really haven't been able to get away from Chase Brown, Puka Nacua, Joe Mixon. And I think the Colts are okay as a defense, but I don't think there's any DST that we really should be going out of our way to target. Now, guys, I do want to call it the 9 to 5 write-up as well. This is something I do every Sunday. Typically comes out like an hour and a half before lineup lock, guys. And if you guys want access to that, make sure to scroll down to the bottom of the 9 to 5 website, enter your email in here, and you can click join. You guys will get an email notification for that, which will then allow you to view the write-up there as well. And I'll typically wait up until like an hour and a half before lineup lock, just in case we do get some slate changing news. I want my information to be just one and done for you guys. I don't want to waste your time. I want it to be clear and concise, give you guys the best information one time so that we're not scrambling to make adjustments. And so looking at the current optimal lineup, guys, here, it's going to be Justin Herbert, Bijan Robinson, Chase Brown, Brian Thomas. So I don't love Brian Thomas. He's at a cheap price tag. That's not terrible. I guess I get it. Jordan Addison, I don't love that. I would rather get to Michael Pittman Jr. over those two personally. Same thing with Ladd McConkey. Like, I'm kind of okay with it. It makes sense why the data would like to get to Herbert and Ladd McConkey together. I would be okay not changing that. I'm okay with that. And then it has Zach Ertz as the tight end. I'm fine with that. That's a shoulder shrug for me. I think I would rather get to TJ Hawkinson, who's only 4.4, only 400, only $600 more. I'd rather get there. And it's getting to Jets DST. I'm kind of indifferent about that. So guys, let's go ahead and do some real quick slight adjustments that I want to make to the lineup builder before we run out the GPP lineups here. So we're going to go to settings. And what I always like to do is flex an eligible tight end. Don't need to do that. I typically like to limit my exposure to 35% max exposure. And I typically like 3 unique players per lineup. So I'm not getting too crazy in terms of my exposure. And then stacking wise, let's just stack our quarterbacks with our receivers on the same team. I feel pretty good about that. We don't have to go too crazy with that. And then player groups. I want at least one of Mixon, at least one of Joe Mixon, at least one of Chase Brown in a lineup. Puka Nacua for sure. You know, obviously I like Puka Nacua as a play. I already mentioned that. Nico Collins, I'm fine with as well. Again, I don't know if I necessarily want Nico and Joe Mixon in the same lineup, but at the same time, I'm kind of okay with it. Like, I'm kind of indifferent about that. I'm actually going to put David Moore in there. I do think he's good value. That's a value play. I don't want to get on my way too much. And I'm kind of okay as it sits right now with this, guys. So I'm going to save it. And even though we're doing 35% max exposure and 3 unique players, we should be able to get this to work as it just did here. And it's still going to be spitting out some optimal lineups for us. So the first build really didn't change at all. The second build, a little bit here. Again, to T. Higgins, I'm okay with that. Trey Palmer, I don't know if I necessarily agree. I would rather get to David Moore. And so one thing that we can do here is, because David Moore is not being pulled in there as much as Trey Palmer, let's make a quick adjustment. So I'm going to click David Moore, type Moore in. I'm going to bump up David's Moore projection to, let's say, 9. Maybe you don't want 35% exposure to him. We do see he's only coming in at 13.5. We can cap his max exposure at 25%. That way we're still pretty overweight on the field. We're almost double. And let's just do double. We're not going to get to 35% max exposure, but I'm still okay with that. And so one other thing that we can do here, guys, as well, while we're at this, I mentioned I didn't want to be on Kyren Williams as much as the rest of the field. And so let's just go by ownership here. And like Alvin Kamara, I probably don't need to be, I'm probably fine with being even weight with the field. Let's cap it at, let's say, 23% exposure. Bijan Robinson as well. I'm kind of okay with that, but let's go down to 15. I don't exactly need to get there as much. Kyren Williams, let's go down to 10. Drake London, let's go down to 10 as well. So, making some slight differences here for me, but I do think that could end up being the difference between having a really good game or a good week and not having a good week. I'm going to bump up Puka Nacua and Joe Mixon to tell the data that I want to be on them a little bit more than maybe the data is suggesting. And then same thing with Justin Herbert, going to bump him up slightly there as well. And so now let's go ahead and run this, see what the data is now spitting out to us as well. But this time I'm going to do 150 lineups so you guys can see, and I'll show you guys the exposures then. And so looking at it, guys, we are still getting to a lot of Justin Herbert here, but we did get 150 lineups. So because we bumped up those ownership projections, it is getting to a lot of Justin Herbert, obviously 35%. And then it is getting to Ladd McConkey. It's choosing to get to Ladd McConkey and basically all the lineups instead of Quentin Johnston. I might say that when a lineup includes Justin Herbert, what I might do instead is limit my exposure to Ladd McConkey to, let's say, 25%, and then that other 15 could still be Quentin Johnston. You could do that. I don't hate it. I don't love it. Okay, so from there, T. Higgins is getting a lot of exposure for me currently. I'm kind of okay with that. Given his price tag, he is a little bit too cheap, but we are getting a lot of Jamar Chase as well, which I find interesting because we look at my quarterback exposure. It's really just Derek Carr, Baker Mayfield, and Justin Herbert, which again, guys, quarterback very much spread out. We are getting to some Russell Wilson here as well. Quarterback very much seems like lucky on this slate, which is a little bit annoying, especially given the pricing. There's not really pricing mistakes. But I think that does a good job of showing you guys where it's trying to get to. Now, I will point out, I am a little bit worried that it's not getting to as much Baltimore and Philly as I would like. I think that should be higher. So one thing we could do is go into team stacks here and then click on Baltimore and Philly, combine those two, and maybe try to get maybe 2 of the players in all of our builds. Now, I don't know if we need to go crazy with that because Baltimore's production is a little bit spread out and a little bit random. At least with Philly, we know it's going to be Dallas Goedert somewhat and A.J. Brown. So instead of doing that, we could just raise up A.J. Brown's production. We could also create another group saying, I want at least one of A.J. Brown, Dallas Goedert, maybe Derrick Henry, maybe Zay Flowers, maybe Mark Andrews. We could do that instead, or Lamar Jackson, Jalen Hurts. We could just do that instead, which I'd be okay with. But I kind of get why the data is doing this right now. But guys, that is going to be all for this video. I want to remind you guys of the promo code that's going on the 9to5 website. Don't do any Black Friday or Cyber Monday deals because I already make the membership as cheap as possible. The cheapest price point I can. But when you guys use the promo code KEEPCASH, and you can get the first month for 20% off. So the $10 membership that it normally is, you can get it for $8 for the first month. So try it out there for $8. Use the promo code KEEPCASH. That's going to be all, guys. Make sure to give a like. Make sure to give a subscribe to the channel. Comment your guys' favorite play or maybe favorite fade. If there's a take that you disagree with, let us know in the comment section why. I'm okay with that as long as it's in a constructive way, right? But that's going to be all, guys. Thank you for watching. Good luck with your builds. And as always, let's keep cashing.